So I started my career as a gardener. So I'm a certified gardener, and from there I went to be an environmental planner, landscape architect. After finishing that, I went to the Middle East, mainly to Israel, Palestinian territories, and Jordan, and I did a PhD and a postdoc. And now we are in the dry places. On the other hand, with heart and love, I'm a botanist and zoologist. So usually you're not seeing me with such a piece around my neck, but rather with a magnifying glass, and for old age reasons, even one with light. So that's how I usually appear. So that's something new I do today. And on the other hand, even so, I'm a man, I'm a very curious person. So, and as I'm a gardener, environmentalist, I come up with such a subject, relevance of provenance of plant material used in restoration. We heard already today from parts of your lectures a little bit about provenance, so the origin of the material you use. Most of those people mentioning that, they talked about being native or non-native, and assuming that non-native is a problem. And I will take the whole thing a little further. I will make the thing more complicated. It's the native stuff, not the non-native. And in order to start that whole thing and to find a direction towards restoration, and we don't mind the technical problems now that we cannot see the headlines, I will read them. So some benefits often expected from plant material used in restoration. Benefits, so if you use in restoration plant material, we want to see benefits. And of course, they should the habitat type to be restored. And here we are already with the question of native versus non-native. And often, that's why I write it here, native species are regarded as being better adapted to the habitats they will be used, and they fit better into the existing ecosystems. They're more palatable, for example, for the local invertebrates and vertebrates. And on the other hand, we often have the claim that non-natives can do better than the natives. And now I introduce a new term here. Also, cultivars are sometimes supposed to do better than the natives. Cultivars, cultivated varieties of wild species. I will later on come to tell you they are non-native. But that's the basic assumption. I saw already from your presentations that most of you stick with that assumption. The natives are better for the habitats than the non-natives, while I saw some people from forestry, and they're the people that often assume that non-natives can do better than the natives. So that's usually the people I have to discuss a little bit more. But I saw that most of you stick to that assumption. The other expectation you have for plant material is they should germinate and or establish fast, and with a minimum loss of investment. So if you do your sowing, you want that most of what you sow is germinating. And if you plant, you want that most of what you plant is going to establish. And I will tell you that that is for the health of the habitat or for the long-lasting survival of the habitat not always the right assumption. At least I try to prove that. The plant material should show a vigorous biomass production above ground or below ground. We know in restoration we have to distinguish above ground biomass production, below ground biomass production. Both are needed in order to fight erosion, for example. So that's often what the people look at. And if the success of a restoration is evaluated, it's very often done by looking for the biomass produced. And I will tell you hopefully, or can convince you hopefully, that biomass is only one important trait, but there's much more traits we have to look at in restoration. The vegetation cover should develop further, allow that other species, natives of course, invade, and it should survive on the long term. Yeah? Which leads back to that point. The other thing I know, plant material should maintain and often enhance soil quality. We all know that legumes are used in order to enhance the nitrogen content of the soil, which is, at least from this perspective of a conservationist, not always what we want in restoration. And sometimes the plant material used should represent the genetic diversity typical for the region of restoration. But that's something that is rarely issued. And I put it as the last point because it's very, very important. And I will show you why. So what else? I learned already from your presentations, heavy metal uptake is an important issue. Even so, I think no one told me what to do with the material then afterwards. Not feeding it to the animals, not feeding it to the humans. What to do? Burning it?
Maybe they burn it and take the ash and
bring the heavy metals back into this?
Mining.
Into the mining area. Okay. Yeah, I know there is ways, but that's really something we have to talk about, because that's something for the short term, not for the long term. So here I wrote, what else? Is there anything else I forgot about what we expect in restoration from species? So from the species we use, because we're talking in that lecture about selecting species.
Human value for human. The value for human of the plants.
Okay, commercial value. Yeah, of course. That's also something that is relevant. Yeah. Okay. And now I'm coming to the point, showing you, however, what is native? Everybody says native. It's native to Greece, it's native to Europe. Oh, here we are already facing a scale problem. What's native to Europe is not necessarily native to Greece. And here I show, because I have that maps available, it's Germany prior to reunification. So that's Berlin. And we have two species of trees, larix and a pine tree. And the big dots, they indicate where the species is native. And the smaller dots indicate where you can find that species nowadays, mainly because of forestry. That picture I showed you to tell you what I said earlier. Native to Europe doesn't mean native to Germany. Native to Germany is not indicating it's native to all of Germany. So be very, very careful if you talk about the term native, and always mention, especially for restoration, the area you're talking about. So I know a lot of restoration projects, they talk about, well, it's native to Spain, so we use it. But of course, it never occurred in that area of Spain. So you need to, it's not only about Spain, I just use that as an example. So I know that also from other places. So you have to make sure that it's really native in the area you're working at. But with that, I want to quit the broad native, and I want to make it much smaller, because about the broad native term, Benz will talk during our conference, and he calls using non-natives already pollution. I just point to the fact that you have to remember that it has a spatial dimension, and that you have to address that spatial dimension if you select plants for restoration. And now we're coming up with that native species. So we have a native species here for a large part of Europe and Germany. Pinus sylvestris, a pine tree. And already in the morphology, if we look at them, we see differences. So that's a broad-crowned pine tree from the lowlands. That's a very small-crowned pine tree from the highlands. So even so, it's just sometimes a few 100 kilometers, they are different. They are differently adapted. And that adaptation we can identify sometimes morphologically. That's why I say it's a textbook example. We all know if you're in the highlands, you will face snow. So it's better the heavy snow slides down. In the lowlands, it's not as problematic, so they show a different behavior. But not always you can see that difference in the morphology, but you can find it in the behavior, in their traits. And if you use the wrong genotypes, not only one genotype, but the wrong genotypes in the wrong place, your restoration effort may fail. And that's why I want to tell you that there is another layer below native. Below native, we have to regard in restoration. And I don't want to take it too far because I know most of you are in plant ecology, so you know about that. Because there's a lot of textbooks examples in the literature. Anyway, I'm emphasizing that here because even so, it's a common knowledge. It's usually not, or it's usually neglected if plants for restoration are selected. And yeah, here's written, what is usually the provenance of the plant material used in restoration? So what's the provenance of the material we usually use? And I have in the back something from the excursion we did last year to Portugal, where it has been done nicely. So it's a quarry, and all the material, or the seeds for the material you see here, has been harvested in the direct surrounding of the quarry. That owner of the quarry has an own nursery, and they produce the plant material for the restoration. But that's a very, very uncommon situation. Huh? So that's what I wrote here as ideal. Seed collection and breeding happens close to the site of restoration, or, if that is impossible, in a region of at least similar environmental conditions, because plants adapt. And maybe I should strengthen here already that plants adapt not only in the very famous ecological time frame of 1.5 million years. So evolution happens in plants at least, but I know it's also from zoology. It happens very, very fast. Sometimes in a few decades. Then the plants are something different. That's also why there's a lot of discussion between taxonomists, whether all these plants that came over from Asia or from Americas to Europe, whether they are taxonomically still the same, because they changed. They changed their behavior, and sometimes and often they changed also their morphology. Anyway, that would be good, but what we face, that material is often not available, either not at all, or at least not in the necessary quantities. Imagine how much material is needed here, and that's only one quarry. And we have a lot. And the other way to do it is constructing nurseries. Bring them to your area, tell them collect the material we need, grow them for us. I know a lot of nurseries, they will do that, but it's very expensive.
And it's also time consuming.
Sure.
Because
That's it.
you have to collect the seeds and then to reproduce new seeds in the nursery and then to use for restoration. And sometimes we don't have so much time available, especially when soil erosion is a very threat. It's a very important threat.
It's very complicated. So assume a new road is going to be built. And you go to the relevant governmental agency and you tell them, well, see, please do the restoration afterwards. Do that with native and local material. Then the guy will tell you it's impossible, we don't get the material. Then you tell him, well, there is a nursery, contract them, they will produce the material. Then that guy will tell you, well, see, we are starting now the planning. We face protest from the public. It may be that we have to go to court, and only in 3 or 4 years' time we can start. On the other hand, we may lose at court. And then we hired the nursery, they produce a lot of plants, we have to pay, and no way to use them. Ooh, contracting is, I should have written here, thank you for pointing that, it's complicated and expensive. Yeah? But still, because we need the material, we need to propagate the collected plant material. Yeah? And since we propagate, and you buy most of the material you buy from nurseries, still, I claim that the provenance of what we release into the landscape has to be called nowadays nursery. And I want to show you a few examples why the provenance of what we release into the landscape has to be called nursery. And in the end, I hope I can show some possible solutions. So, why is nursery a provenance? Why is nursery an origin of plants? And you see, now I'm going to focus only anymore on native species. I'm not mentioning the non-natives, yeah? Or I mention them in a way that I claim that a lot of natives are non-native. Even if you purchase native species from local nurseries, and I should have written simply nurseries, because local nurseries are very not very plentiful. Most are simply nurseries. The material we get from them originates from geographically different regions than the place where we want to use them. If you buy agrostis grasses, agrostis species in Europe, most of what you get has been produced in the US or in Australia. Quite some forbs. Australia and US, they produce a lot of the plant material we use here for sowing. Yeah?
From Australia,
also legumes, but also composites, so achillea and things like that. Yeah. They are from overseas. And they are from overseas, and they have been grown overseas already for decades. So what happened? They adapted to the local conditions in the US and in Australia, but not anymore to the places where you want to use them. And it's, well, I forgot, I think only for Germany we have 130,000 tons of grass seeds every year imported and used. Not all goes to restoration, but quite some. And of course, if I talk about seeds and tons of seeds, you have to imagine it's not about castanea or something like that. It's a very tiny stuff. Sometimes 1 gram means 1,000 individuals. So it's really a lot of material that is introduced. And I conclude from that the material we introduce is genetically modified. It's not the genetic modification everyone is scared of nowadays by transplanting the DNA from one plant into another one, but it's the old-fashioned way of modifying plants, something we do since the Stone Age, that we collect and we breed the big ones with another big one and receive an even bigger one. Yeah? So we use genetically modified plants and bring them to the environment. And well, I saw in some of your lectures you try heavily to make cuttings root. Oh, what's that? bringing a few genetic individuals in several thousand of pieces into the environment, reducing the local biodiversity, calling that restoration. You may shout at me if I'm wrong. So do that to make the situation here more active. Yeah? And cultivation effects are almost unavoidable. They're almost, I write, in order to open later a door for a solution, but they're almost unavoidable if you propagate plants. And I show you an example here in that photo. That's Plantago lanceolata. These ones are the varieties we purchased from the nurseries. That are the varieties we collected in the wild. So they changed morphology. And that's also very much known that one of the most important cultivation effects is that you get higher plants, bigger plants. Because big plants, they attract, I told you, I'm one myself, attract the gardener. That's what they collect. And on the end of their work life, most of the gardeners have problems with the back. So backbone is hurting. Another reason not to go down that deep, but to collect the higher ones. All that leads really to a change in morphology and in traits of plants. Just to make it brief here, there's much more about that. And all botanical gardens dealing with ex situ conservation, they face that problem. After a few generations, the plant they have in the garden, they are not anymore the same. And if you bring them out again into the habitats where you collected them, they may not survive. Why? Because they are as lazy as humans, these plants. So what we do is, in nurseries, plants are propagated under ideal conditions. So they always get enough water. They always get enough nutrients. Sometimes they're not going to get enough space. Also leads to the fact that they are then more high-growing. But these ideal conditions are a real problem because they will never face them outside again. Except we do it for human benefits for food. Then they get constant human care. But usually, if we do restoration, we're not aiming for constant human care. We're aiming for something, for plants that will survive without facing that constant human care. Yeah? That's it. Selection in nurseries always aims for plants that perform best under human care. And of course, I show you that picture then. In consequence, we face a human rather than a natural selection. That's something we should keep in mind. If we use nurseries, we do a human selection rather than a natural selection. And of course, and now I'm lying, so what's the problem? A big pumpkin is, or a big fruit of a pumpkin is fine for me. It's not, I don't like them, but it's, for those that like pumpkin, that's the solution. But it's only a solution if you keep them under constant human care, because they gave up on some of the trade-off they gained in nature in order to allow such a shift in resource allocation. And for that, I would like to do something I know. You all studied ecology, you know about that. Still, I want to highlight that again. Well, there's a difference between human selection and natural selection. And for me, the big difference is natural selection manages to select for so-called trade-offs. It selects for a lot of traits, and it decides how much to invest into that trait compared to other trait. And that's based on the environmental conditions it faces. Humans, I tell you, if you have to select for fruit size and drought for sustaining droughts. We will face already problems to do that. If a third, a fourth, or a fifth trait has to be recognized in that field of plant breeding, you're losing. You cannot do that. Huh? So, and I found that saying of Jeremy Fox on Oikos blog in that respect very important. You can't have a super genotype or a super species. You will never have someone who is able to do everything. Yeah? So Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was able to kill everybody, but probably the trait or the change in investment was brain size. Yeah? Something like that. So you have to take the energy from one trait to bring it to another place. And that leads to the fact we will never have a species that manages everything. But we can have species that manage what is needed at the size of restoration. Yeah? You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you may get what you need, is the Rolling Stones put it. It's the same thing we have here. Yeah? So, and I have to say that natural selection allows plant traits to trade a little more here against a little more there. That's what natural selection allows. Human selection fails to imitate that, at least the way we do it. And I gave that example already, so I'm not going to do that again. However, what I told you, we can select for drought resistance, for fruit production, for flower size, for more biomass, but we can never be sure that that leads to the long-term survival of what we bring into the landscape. And that's what we want. We want long-term survival. Yeah? And yeah, what I said earlier about Schwarzenegger applies here. Of course, big fruit, but maybe few seeds. Also beneficial for humans. So, and I will give you a few examples now of the life history traits that are commonly changed if you do plant breeding in nurseries the way they do it now. Germination strategies are changed. You know, faster germination, everyone using plants wants it. The customer wants it. They pay you. And then they look at the calendar and they tell you, well, you did your sowing already 1 week ago. Where is the carpet? Where is my vegetation cover? In Central Europe, we even have regulations on it. So after 3 weeks, the carpet must be visible, and after at least 1 month, it must have a cover of at least 80%. So what? That's not how nature selects. So faster germination, it changes the ratio of germination and seeds staying dormant. And all of us working in arid areas and dry areas, we know how important dormancy is. So dormancy is one of the most important features if you want to survive in dry lands. Yeah? Dispersal strategies are changed fast. We even produced, since Stone Age, quite some weeds in fields. They refuse now to disperse. They keep their capsules closed because they expect humans to come to harvest and to thresh the material, to bring the seeds into safety and to bring it out the next year again. They stopped dispersing. It's unbelievable. Yeah? Or the trade-off between zoochorus, anemochorus, and achoros dispersal is changed because you don't need that in human care. You don't need that in the nursery. the biomass. I don't have to say anything about that anymore if I show that. Yeah. Anyway, there is much more. It's just the examples. And I would like to come back to that dormancy. As I said, it's of overwhelming importance that not all of the material produced in one year is also germinating in the next year. And here I show experiments we did with two plants from Central Europe, Plantago lanceolata again, and Lotus corniculatus, so it's a legume. And it's often used in revegetation and restoration efforts. And what you find here, the black line, that's the germination of the wild varieties. The red line is the cultivated varieties. And you see that the germination of the cultivated varieties, it's almost 100%, while the wild varieties reach a maximum of 80%, so they keep 20 to 30% in the box for the next years to come. They waste. But of course, following the regulations we have nowadays, the restorationist is more satisfied with that. But I tell you, they have to re-evolve dormancy in order to survive. We don't know whether they will make that. Even worse, or more problematic, the situation in Lotus corniculatus. So the wild varieties never made more than 10% of the seeds they produced to germinate, while cultivation allowed them already to reach 80%. So again, they lost a very, very important trait. And maybe I add to that, here the gardeners purposely selected for varieties, because varieties is also an economical point. A gardener who develops a new variety is allowed to charge for that. No one is allowed to use that variety without paying into his pockets. So very important. So here there was some conscious selection. In that, no one knows any varieties. That difference and that difference in growth form happened unconsciously. So no one aimed for that. It just happened. Yeah. Yeah.
May I ask you a tricky, let's say, question in the slide? Lotus corniculatus is a perennial legume. So if we use it, the commercial cultivar for restoration, we have a very high percentage of plant cover, and with perennial plants, that means that the years to come, they produce their own seeds.
Right.
So
and all
what we need in such case, that's I said you it's a tricky question, seed dormancy.
Yeah.
We need seed dormancy in this situation.
Well, you need them back for the generations to follow. Yeah. So yeah? If you send out parents that don't know about dormancy, you will receive children that don't know about dormancy. And how to gain it back then? Yeah, here's some.
I have a question about this. You show here this graph. You did any special treatment for cultivator seed and comparison with wild, or no? Just
we grew them in a common garden together.
yes, you get seed from the cultivate for agricultural.
And we selected in the wild.
Without any.
Or collected in the wild, not selected.
Without add any materials, chemical.
Yes, nothing.
Nothing.
No.
And fertilizer.
No. But we were able, we did that same experiment also in the greenhouse. And we broke the dormancy to test against, of course, and then we received much higher.
And did you find what is the why it happened?
Why that happened?
Yes.
Because the gardeners in the nursery, they do the sowing, and next year they harvest the seeds.
Yes.
And then they plow the place and grow something else, or grow the first generation again. So gardeners never wait for several years at the same spot to wait for the dormant seeds to germinate, to collect also them. That, by the way, would be a solution to that problem. Yeah?
Okay.
By harvesting a population you have sown for the next 10 years. Yeah? But because they don't do that, they think annually as a tax office. So you face a situation that the dormant seeds from the first generation, they collected also from the field, the first generation. But they are never recollected again. They're never bred. You only get those from the first year. Yeah.
But if a plant can forget dormancy after we take it and cultivate it, maybe it can adapt in a natural environment and
Right.
remember again how
Yes. Huh? Maybe. That's it.
did you
Let's hope.
you didn't
No. Huh? That's yeah. Will also outlast me. So I will be. If I start now such an experiment, it will it will take quite a lot of years. Yeah. We also could show that for the biomass I was talking about, it's visible from the picture, but here I wanted to show you the morphology so that they are growing more upright, the cultivated varieties, than the local varieties. But we measured also biomass, here the size of the rosette, and of course it was a clear difference and a significant difference between the cultivated varieties and the local varieties. That's all examples for that there's really a change in traits. I'm not talking about the relevance of these traits now. I just tell you that's a change in traits. I just, with the dormancy, I'm pretty sure that this is a very, very important trait. Yeah? So the other thing, that's not me, I'm not a geneticist, but in forestry, they looked at the genetic variation and diversity of trees. And something that, and I stole these pictures from the internet in order to visualize what I'm telling you, is a very, very common practice in forestry is size selection. And it's not only in forestry, but there's very obvious, but it's also in the production of grasses and forbs. If you go for biomass, you also select for size. But in forestry, you do it for sure. You select the highest growing shrubs, the strongest looking shrubs. You use the highest trees, the strongest looking trees. And the forester, as you know, is even walking through his forest. And then he has a little spray color and marks, you are a weakling. Let's take you out. Yeah. So, and then his workers are coming and they cut the weaklings. And these guys, Konrad and Schmidt, they looked for the genetic variation and diversity, and they found that the lowest variation and diversity in two trees they checked was in the collective of the big plants. They had been so strongly selecting already during the last decades that they produced genetically depauperate individuals. Yeah? So size selection is already a bad interference, and these guys concluded also that size selection is critically affecting the produced plants and it should better be avoided. Yeah? And now to another thing. So now we have these guys outside. And you said, well, no problem. They gain all the features back, whatever way. Yeah? What we did, we produced in order to evaluate that, and I told you about thousands of tons of material that goes out into the landscape. Really a lot. Can the remaining genetic material survive that influx of modified material? Can they? We don't know yet. There's no results on that. But we produced artificially hybrids between the cultivated variety and the wild variety. And what we found is that the hybrids, I put these arrows on the lines for the hybrids, they perform again differently from the cultivated varieties. They perform differently from the wild varieties, but their performance is closer to the cultivated varieties. Again, it was 1 and 2 years after doing it, so I don't know what happens later on. But if you assume that's here 1-to-1, 50-to-50, one half was a cultivated variety, the other half was a native variety. But now expect that 500 kilogram of Plantago, the one I had on the front cover, is introduced in the stand of the remaining 100 or 1,000 individuals of it. Then it's not anymore 50-50. But even in 50-50, they take more from the cultivated than from the native, seemingly. It will be much more if you release them to the wild and they hybridize with a few wild varieties. So, another aspect of it is we conducted a competition experiment. Here you see the pots. How should they compete in pots? We have a non-native variety and a native variety in one pot, and we measured a lot of traits. It was statistically very sophisticated and approved meanwhile, so it's also published already. And what we found, here you see the poor native variety, that's the cultivated one, and still you see what we showed you in the greenhouse. It keeps that morphology of being more prostrate than the cultivated variety, and of course produced more biomass, more seeds, intended to outcompete the wild variety. So there is a chance, taking together the amount of seeds we introduce into the landscape, how many species, individuals of these species are still, or how many stands of these species are still existing outside, there is a chance for cultivated species outcompeting the natives. Yeah? And only in one case we observed a cultivar of Lotus corniculatus, Acroeno trueno. Only later I found out it has been selected in Uruguay. And Acroeno trueno, you can simply buy it. You order Lotus corniculatus and you get it. The mother plants we got, they died during one harsh winter. During the first year it looked like they were suppressed by the cultivated variety, but in the next spring 100% of the cultivated variety was dead. And of course then the wild variety did better, but only then. And we never observed that in the hybrids. So the hybrids always did better than the wild varieties. And consulting Benz, I have to say, I try now to introduce the term oversized wimp into science, to say that are plant varieties selected by humans for size, and they look like they are big and strong. But as soon as they are released from human care, they die. Oversized wimps. Not every big guy is a strong guy. Yeah? So, however, long-term research on that subject is, of course, needed. That are the first glimpses on it. So, and now a slide with a lot of text. Are cultivation-based changes in relevant traits of plants desirable in restoration? So I would have expected someone of you standing up and saying, but I want the big guy, I want the fast-growing guy, and I want the one without dormancy. I want my carpet fast, and it will last, will manage. But I have no proof for that. There's no science on it. There's no research on it done so far. But if we assume that natural selection, and that those that believe in Darwin, I think they do, that natural selection is achieving at least an adequate trade-off, if not the better trade-off, then every change from that trade-off should be regarded as negative and not desirable. And that's the approach I take at the moment. I believe that what they gain outside is what they need in order to survive. That's why they survive, except for those that go extinct. Then we should not allow that we change these traits during propagation. But consequently, we have to regard provenance. And provenance, origin, is now standing here as a synonym for having the right trade-off in order to survive in that given, under the given conditions. Is that acceptable? I think we can use that synonymously. So then we have to consider provenance in order to get good restoration results. And restoration is in the Alps, in Central European Alps, of course, again, not a dry land, but we can transfer that to there. Already 30 years ago, they realized that their projects work badly or fail with the material they got from the nurseries. They started to approach the nurseries and they tell them, well, I need that species, but please produce in an altitude of 1,000 meters for me or an altitude of 2,000 meters, so I will use that material there again because it adapted to that situation. I'm not going to use that material in lower areas. We faced that situation 20 years ago when in a lot of Central European rivers, the reeds went down. We lost the reeds, Phragmites, from all our rivers. So they started restoration projects and they realized they failed, only to identify later on that Phragmites is clonal and it has a lot of clones. And those that survive in the water depths of 20 centimeters will not make it on the dry land, and they will not make it in 40 centimeters. But those that make it in 40 centimeters, you can use at 40 centimeters, but not at 20. So it's a local adaptation, and of course, if you have clonal plants, that sticks, but you have to know about it, and you have to use them under the right environmental conditions. And that's all what I call provenance. And as in a lot of countries, native and semi-natural habitats, it's not about Greece, I know there is a native and non-native vegetation is plentiful here. I saw it right again from my car. If you go to other places, it's not like that. So here you might have a chance to collect what you need next to the restoration site. But we have a lot of places where that is not feasible. You will not get enough material. And even more, you will harm the source site by collecting the seeds from there. So because of that, we have to find a way of introducing provenance into production. That's what I wrote here. Invent cultivation methods allowing propagation under the environmental conditions similar to those at the site of release. In Germany, I have already 2 nurseries. They refuse to water their propagation stance. Because they say, well, so let's do a selection. We collect all the seeds from the source site, we spread them, we add a little bit of fertilizer in order to account for the fact that we grow more of one species on the field than it's normally outside, but we do not water. So that we select, or that we do not irrigate, we select those genetic varieties fit to deal with these conditions. So they save water and they select the right species for that environment or for these environmental conditions. And I put that just on you as statements, without giving too good reasons. That's what and we may discuss that later, but that's how we did it now. So how to address the relevance of provenance in restoration? It's what I do now. I bring that fact you haven't thought about before, or not as I place it to you now. Raising awareness, I saw it in the publication yesterday at Lake Quirini. That's what we have to do. You have to gain acceptance for provenance as a criterion for seed quality. All those that are caged in the European Union, if you tell them, I want some seeds only from the Alicante area, then they will tell you, put you to court, because you're blocking other competitors. Because so far, provenance is not a seed quality, and you're only allowed to ask for seed qualities. So you have to take the seed then from someone from the Netherlands or Germany or Denmark, because the seed quality is now measured in how much is germinating, how much is surviving, and things like that, but not provenance. So we need to make provenance a criterion, and we already managed that on with the seed directive. The new seed directives of the EU includes a paragraph on, or paragraphs on preservation seed mixtures. And if we work in restoration, we work, of course, on preservation seed mixtures. And there's written down now that each member country of the EU is supposed to develop seed transfer zones, and seed preservation mixtures have to originate from the seed transfer zone of the area where you want to use them later on. It took me and my colleagues the last 10 years to achieve that, but it's now in the EU seed directive. In that respect, provenance is already recognized, but I realize that restorationists don't know about that. EU seed directive, and check that out. And in order to do that, you need a system of seed transfer zones. If you look into the internet, you will see that in the US, that thing is existing. There's even a society of landscape architects. They intend to deal only with native species, and they issued for all of the US is a delineation of the US into seed transfer zones. I will show you from Central Europe such an example later on. And what I wrote here is maybe also something new to you, but to develop a filter that allows the identification of species for blanket use. Because the seed transfer zone, they need still to be rather large. Because what you want is that the company produces seeds so that whenever you have a project, you can go to that company and tell them, please hand me over the seeds. If the company owner tells you, well, I need 3 years to produce them, you're not happy. But for very small areas, you cannot hold seed material available, because you don't never know whether someone will buy it and or whether it will decay in your storage. So you need to have a relatively large area, but still with approximately the same environmental conditions. And if you do that, you will face problems with nature conservationists and with taxonomists. There's a lot of taxonomically problematic species. They differ in morphology mainly over short distances. In Central Europe, rubus is an example. In Israel, echinops is a problem. They did taxonomy very, very problematic. Shifts on short distances, sometimes of 10, 20 kilometers. So you cannot use these species in restoration because the species, they start in the wild to separate, to evolve into something new, into more than one species. What do? You collect them, you grow them in the nursery, you turn evolution back. Yeah? You're not believing me. I saw that.
I cannot understand why that happens.
So if a species starts to separate into several species, and you don't mind, for you it's one, you collect them here, you collect them there, and you bring them together. They are not yet really two species, at least they are not separated, they still mingle, they still breed together. Then you stop the process of these species separating. And so that's why conservationists say, well, no, of course, with Poa annua or very common species, do it, because there is no way that these species start to separate. But taxonomically complicated groups where you don't know the real distribution and where the species are in the brink of separating into several species, don't do that. And you need to have a filter in order to remove that. Also, governmental agencies, they will request from you, at least those connected with nature conservation, not to introduce rare and endangered species into the environment. Why? At least not on the broad scale. Because you lose track of what is going on. Nowadays, if you don't use them, here we have the one stand out of the last 20 we have of that species. But if everybody starts to sow, you don't know anymore where are the original stands, and you never know whether the stands you produce will really survive on the long term. So there should still be a way of keeping track of what's going on. So what we did was to develop a filter to get rid of all this taxonomically complicated stuff and to get rid of all those species that are rare and endangered. And if you have a restoration project and you want to introduce endangered and rare species, contact or do that in close collaboration with the relevant governmental agencies and receive permission for that. And then you can produce them and use them, but not blanket. Pay an appropriate price. I will later show one slide telling you a bit about the cost, because producing local species or local species material is more expensive, unfortunately, right now than producing that plant material that has no provenance. Not really, because you don't know where it comes from, or it comes from the nursery. And you need, and I will show it also, I still have the time, to develop rules on how to identify a population suitable for harvest, especially in areas where the semi-natural and natural vegetation is almost gone. It's important to identify the last remaining stands of the wild varieties. Rules for seed collection, as I said already. If you go there, you collect every year all the seeds of a stand, then that population will probably die out. And you need to develop rules for propagation. So how to bring the gardener to bending down very deeply to collect also the seeds from the low-growing individual, not only from the high-growing individual, or machinery.
I have a question about last may you explain more about the seed collection?
I will.
The minimum size of population.
I will. Yeah, it's still to come. Okay, just first the principles. And then I show a little bit on how to fill these principles. And the first thing to fill the principles is, as I said, examples for quality of provenance. That's something we produce for Central Europe. And I believe you need that also for other places. Huh? So seed quality of provenance. Of course, the non-European plant material, that's the most thing you get nowadays. European plant material, Central European, but you don't know where it comes from. Yeah? And then I call it regional plant material. So it's above a mesocore. Mesocore is scientifically defined. But the mesocores are usually in size too small to allow an economically feasible production of seed material. So that's why you have always to unite several mesocores in order to produce something that's more or less artificial, yeah, but still valid regional plant material. And that regions, they are big enough to allow to produce material, to hold material available so that someone can come and ask for that. And that one, the local plant material really, if you do a restoration, before the impact or the influence happens, collect plants, build your road, and bring the material back. That's usually something you only do because it's so expensive. You do for very rare or really endangered species. But that's something where you have for sure to contract a nursery. You have to tell them in advance. You have to collect the material with them together. They have to grow it for you, and you pick it up later on. But that's the most expensive way of producing plant material. Question on that? No? Just do it for your area and replace the names here. Yeah. And as I need to show an example, and well, US is far away, Australia is far away, I take Central Europe, even so we know. I think the lowest amount of rainfall you can reach is in Brandenburg with between 400 and 500 millimeter of annual precipitation. So it's rather humid still. Yeah. What we did, we subdivided Germany in 98 mesocores. That was what I told you about, using environmental factors known to influence vascular plant distribution. There was no big science on it. Just the long-term 0-degree isotherm in January, it's known to be decisive of where certain species are growing and where they are not growing. The long-term mean temperature of July is known in Central Europe to be a very, very important factor, decisive for plant distribution. We did that in categories for the mean annual rainfall. We used the pedogenic rock formations on a large scale, the soil classes, and the differences between January and July mean temperatures as indicator for oceanic and continental climates. Also that is very much known to influence the plant distribution. After applying that onto these 98 mesocores, we got an interim result of 50 small geographic areas that were distinguished by at least one environmental factor, one of these factors. And of course, we came up with that 50 geographic areas for Germany only. And of course, the nursery said, well, how I want to produce material for all of Germany, how can I do that if I have 50 areas and need for a possible 3,000 species you can use in restoration in Germany for 50 areas? Well, it's not working. You cannot grow things like that. So that's why we sat down again and we reunited these 50 areas into larger areas, but still with what we assume similar environmental conditions. And we came up with such a map. You see that the Alps are very small. So that's now what is valid. It went also into German law now. If you want to do restoration, you need to have, take seed material from the region where you want to use it. And the nurseries, or some nurseries, they start to produce the material already, some holding it available for a large number of seed transfer zones, but we have now 21 seed transfer zones in Germany. It's implemented, and we're going to promote that further. And I think that's a complicated but still necessary situation even for larger countries. And you need much more of these seed transfer zones then. Produce the seed material here, and while producing that seed material, that's the most important factor, keeping the local or regional adaptations, because you grow them under these conditions, so they will do better than material from here. Yeah? So, and then I said, well, the filter, you cannot use everything. Of course, we took the flora, and in principle, first, you can use the whole flora of an area for restoration. Of course, you can. If you manage to produce the material, why not? Yeah? So, we removed the non-natives. Yeah? If they manage, from my perspective, they manage, but it's not my job to help them. Yeah? Hybrids and neo-endemics, even so native species hybridize, they should find their ways themselves. Why are you going to collect a fertile hybrid, you produce it and you use it then in restoration? Not necessary. If they hybridize, they should hybridize, but use the parent species. Yeah? And neo-endemics, I don't know, is anyone aware of that term? What it is?
Does it come from agriculture and then disperse into the wild, for example?
It could come from agriculture, of course. It happens sometimes, but it's if radiation happens, so a new species is evolving. You may find a new species in a certain area, that's where it evolved, but you don't know whether it will survive, whether it will spread. So, but why helping it? It's another way of interfering into evolution. If it happens, it happens, but leave it where it is. And allow it to make its way alone.
Neo-endemic naturally?
Yes.
Okay.
They occur. So example for Central Europe is the genus Oenotera. You know that? It's originally a genus from the US and from the Americas. Let's say the Americas, it's also further down. And about 3 or 4 of these species were brought for ornamental purposes to Europe. And nowadays we have more than 40 species in Europe. They evolved from these 3 or 4 that have been brought over. So it's like with the lemurs on Madagascar, one came over, for sure in more than one individual, and they split into several species. And that happens in plants, and it's not rare that such a thing happens. And well, we don't want them for blanket use in restoration, so leave them out. I talked about the problematic species, zoos, where only a few experts are able to distinguish them. Hiratium, I know it's also in Spain a big issue. A lot of species, and if there is 1 or 2 people being able... For Stuka. But Festuca is a big problem because we need them. We really need that species in restoration, at least in Central Europe, especially in drylands. And they are tough to distinguish, so you need, even as a nursery, and that's what we do, we hire the experts. We hire the experts, they aid this, the seed collection, and then you have to make sure that they are not mixed up in the nursery. Yeah? Rare and endangered species, I talked about it, because you still want to be able to track what is rare and endangered. If you hide that, because everything is sown, you cannot do any more a meaningful nature conservation. Species that are there. but relatively infrequent. We remove them from that list. And we are capable of doing it because we have distribution atlases for Central Europe of the species. So there's been a lot of mapping going on during the last decades. Species without known indigenous stands. Everybody knows Lolium perenne, or? Lolium, the ryegrass. It's what all our soccer players are playing on. Yeah? We don't have in Central Europe any known native stand anymore. It has been sown in such amounts that it's hidden. We don't know. So we are not producing it because we don't know where the native stands are. Yeah? Species with a clear boundary of range in the provenance zone. So you must still make, even so you have that seed transfer zones, for certain species there might be a clear boundary in that area. So you cannot use it blanketly. Of course you can use it if you use it in the right, on the right side of the boundary. But don't use it blanketly in that area. Yeah? And species without generative production in Central Europe, so that those that only vegetatively grow. That's something we are not addressing at the moment. But of course, there is also a possibility for doing that. That's just our set of rules. I want to give as an example. It's not a set of rules I want to introduce onto you. You have to make yourselves the suitable rules for your own regions. That's just the principles. And if you have such a thing, you can make it available to everybody via the internet. That's what we did. It's only in German because it's for German, it's thought for Germany, but we have the way of identifying the seed transfer zone where you are, and of course you can zoom in very closely up to 1 to 5,000, so you can really identify the borders between these regions exactly. You can identify where is your restoration site, what is the seed transfer zone, and you have the we have some rules telling you how to select the adequate harvesting site, which is relevant in places where semi-natural and natural vegetation is not anymore existing, or where they are scarce. Let's say not existing, then you can skip it, but if it's scarce, then you need such a tree helping you to identify whether it's adequate for harvest. I'm not going through that in detail, except it was later on of interest. Yeah? And we have to develop rules for the harvest of the material for propagation. Yeah? And here we start with from reading through literature, talking with geneticists, reading the literature about or what the geneticists wrote about that subject. Of course, we should avoid to harvest populations with less than 100 individuals. You leave them. If you have such a thing, it's either a rare species or an endangered species, or it's a stand not suitable for propagation, because genetic variation diversity is probably already very poor. Yeah?
Then you select for the non-rare species.
Yes. Yes. In that case, it's true. Yeah? Because for the rare species, for the endangered species, you need a different approach, simply. Yeah? Because that's providing a lot of material that is always available so that you can do your restoration work. It's not selecting species for reintroduction into nature or for helping rare and endangered species. Yeah? So choose populations of at least 1,000 individuals for harvest, better a multiple of it. Yeah? Harvest at least 50 individuals from each population, and make sure that you collect everything you can visually distinguish. So the low ones, the high ones, those with different color. And that's the pain for you. If you work for a nursery, you want to make the most of your time. Of course, what individuals you're looking at? The one with a lot of seeds. Grabbing one individual and already half of what I need to bring is in. But you have to go also for those producing only 1 or 2 pods or a few seeds or a few flowers in order to keep the genetic diversity, because that's what propagation in nurseries nowadays is not doing. And if we want to change that, we need all the diversity in the nurseries. Yeah? Decide about frequency and intensity of harvest, which is again a trade-off you have to make now. Going there every 5 years and collect everything, go there every year and collect only 20%. And that's, of course, what you do. It depends on whether you deal with annuals or perennials. And the other thing, I try always to convince those people being skeptic about that, if you do it like that, and you use that material at your restoration site, your restoration site can later be, of course, also a source site for plant material, because you used the local and native material and allow them to establish, allow the resource site to recover. Why not using it later on then again as a source site, as long as you did your best to collect the maximum of the genetic variation and diversity of that population. Yeah? And always, if you're not sure, simply be more careful, but do something. Yeah? Rules for propagation. Yeah? It's not all we have as rules on propagation, that's only examples. Species that hybridize, you have to keep a certain distance. Yeah? But what you also have to do is, because you face that cultivation effects, you can be as careful as you want. You will face that cultivation in the nursery. You have to make sure that you replenish your source in the nursery. So it's not the way that you go out once to the collection site, you collect the material, and for the next 100 years your company is propagating that material. Because also in the nursery the plants will not face evolution. And while the species, even so, as, especially since I saw quite some of you they want to deal with climatic change. Don't underestimate that plants adapt also to climate change. And if you take them to the nursery now and you release them into the landscape only in 20 years, they may not be fit enough, because meanwhile climate has changed. So that's why you have to replenish every so and then the material, the mother source you have in your nursery. Yeah? And of course also that differs for annuals, perennials, shrubs and trees. So again, I'm not forcing that regulations we faced on you, but you need to have such regulations in order to produce local plant material. And at least in Germany, you need a certificate. Otherwise, you have all the cheaters. They sell you the US material and claim it's local. It's also, while we did our experiments, we purchased that material from nurseries, and we came over that situation that we asked them, do you have local material? And later on in our experiments, we could prove that it's not. Yeah? So that's why you need certificate, and all the rules I showed you behind are in these certificates. Yeah? And because I knew you will ask about the costs. Yeah? That's why I asked few of my local producers, and they told me that grasses are indeed expensive. And well, no, that's the wrong thing. Grasses you can produce 4 times, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Grasses are more expensive to produce, so you have to pay 4 times the amount you pay nowadays for the grass material of unknown provenance. If you want to have the known provenance, because it's also complicated, as I said, you need for stucco and other complicated grass species, you need to hire experts. It's approximately 4 times more expensive. Yeah? While for the forbs, for the other herbaceous species, there's no difference if you do it regionally or on a large scale. But just please don't compare it to the Achillea material you get from Australia. That's of course cheaper. Yeah? But it's manageable. So that's what I wanted to say. If you want to produce, if you cannot produce, I have one more solution for you. And you cannot produce. I showed you how complicated it is to produce. And that's, it's 2000, 2001, so quite some time ago, in Deir el-Bala, you know it, in the Gaza Strip. And I was asked there to revegetate a garbage dump, a solid waste dump. Ooh. Native plant material. Not available. Yeah? Suggesting to them to produce them. No way. So when I asked them, do you have any drought-resistant plants? They brought me Catobrotus. I think you know it here from the Mediterranean areas. It takes a lot of water. You can squeeze the water out of it, just it takes it from very, very deep down. Yeah? It's a South African species. So, and I said, well, I presented first a complicated way. Now I'm producing in a more simple way. And, I wanted to make it in a few slides only. I wrote here, extension for area for the solid waste dump. And what you see here is the local vegetation. Then, of course, it's not only native, or not always native, not everything, but it's at least what's growing locally. And since these guys intended to extend the waste dump here, that was the initial situation from down. In the other photo I was up. I told them, transplant the soil substrate. And here, even so it sounds big, huh? I told them, just collect the upper 4 centimeters maximum. You see, even the maximum is here in the upper 2 centimeters. Don't mind that's written worms and without worms. That's from another research. But you can find that the maximum of the seeds is right in the upper 2 to 3, maximum to 4 centimeters. So if you collect that, you have all the seed bank. You should not do that from an area you want to keep undisturbed. But if you know that area will be built up or otherwise destroyed, then collect it. Then transplant it. And only in places where you know that you have a strong seasonal situation. So a lot of months without rain, a few months with rain, then you need initially to do something else. That's why I highlighted here the irrigation pipes. That was because I knew that most of what is growing here has a strong dormancy. The dormancy necessary to survive on the long term. If you place that stuff here and you water outside of the rainy season, and you want to establish the vegetation cover outside of the rainy season, because if you have such a situation, the rainy season starts, then you have the erosion before the plants will germinate. And where will the plants germinate? Down here, where they are washed to. And that's something you don't want. So you need, despite the fact that you have the the local seed bank here, you need to know to grow something that you can water and it will germinate. So something without dormancy. You need to know the dormancy traits of that species you use, and then use the traits of these two species. All of them are African, I think, in origin. Cynodon dactylon and Mesembryanthemum crystallinum is for sure from South Africa, but now widespread through Africa and to the Middle East. And that is even a bad weed on the land of the farmers. So we sent our workers to the fields of the farmers. They dug that grass out and planted it on top of our garbage dump. And it's low-growing plants. You can see that easily. It's very low-growing. That's important because they have been, their germination and or their planting, their successful establishment has been aided by these irrigation pipes. So we had no erosion. And later on it looked like that. And you see it's a high vegetation of the local vegetation. And these low-growing species from Africa, which are non-native, they are suppressed now by the high-growing local vegetation. So that was a very fast and easy way without propagating plants. But of course, the space where you get the seed bank from must be available. And the other situation is when I came there, after doing the transplantation, I had a quarter of an hour before the Merkava arrived. So that was a tank. So before the was another incident that the Israelis went into the Gaza Strip, and it was 15 minutes I had approx to count what I initiated there, and I found more than 80 species in that time. So initiating a vegetation cover by more than 80 species, there is no seed mixture, and you will not do seed mixtures allowing for that. So that's what I could present you here by considering provenance. You saw here I considered provenance. The other way of considering provenance, if you cannot transplant the seed bank, go and produce on a regional level at least. Thank you. And now let's discuss.